Yeah, I would say so. Yes. I mean, it's such a broad term. I mean, if you play with cells, you play with proteins. I think everyone can sort of say that they're sort of a synthetic biologist. But for me, like when I consider a synthetic biologist is someone that definitely engineers, some sort of organism, and at the same time produces something valuable. I think if they get to sort of that stage, I always consider them as, yeah, they're the true sort of synthetic biologist. Yeah. The first one that always comes to my mind is biofuels. I mean, that's the one that I work with a lot. And so the idea is that you would engineer a cell or some sort of pathway inside a bacterial cell or a yeast cell that such that they can produce any sort of these green or advanced biofuels. The idea is that they would have the same chemical properties as you would see at a Petro-Canada or Ultramar, and now just cheaper and better for the environment. Unfortunately, that's still very hard to do, but there's been so much progress, and so there's nothing yet in the market. But some of the, I guess, real life, market examples, one that always comes to my mind as well is drugs. So the first ever synthetic biology example that gone from sort of the research lab to the actual industry and people can actually use it is essentially this drug called artemisinin, which is an anti-malarial drug. I think it's like $100 per dose or even higher than that. But some synthetic biologists, they were really smart with that, and they were able to essentially replicate the pathway implants and then place that pathway inside a yeast cell, essentially be able to produce artemisinin through yeast cells. And just, yeast is much easier to grow, the reagents that are involved are cheaper. And so I think Sanofi, one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies that are out there, they're able to, drive, I think now that cost to be like 25 cents a dose. So now it's affordable for essentially anyone that has malaria. So now I think the malaria epidemic has been reduced because of this. And now they have lots of derivatives of that. And now they can, produce different types of malaria and then be able to produce that essentially at the same cost. I mean, even just talking to my mom, she says like, oh yeah, you know what? I hear China, like they can use something like this CRISPR protein, and then they can make like different babies with a preferred sex. I mean, when they hear that, then they say, oh, when you genetically modify something, that's a bad thing. So I think the main thing is that you have to educate. I mean, education is just utmost important. So when I hear that from my mom, I'm like, yeah, I mean, I think it's our duty and people that are working in this field to essentially create, I don't know, conferences or workshops that are essentially open to the public, and then such that we can essentially educate them. And so, every year in Canada, there's always this synthetic biology workshop. We always talk about what is the newest and latest in synthetic biology, what are the newest applications that are out there. And then the main importance where we sort of end off the conference is talking about the ethical issues that are behind some of the products that are out there. And so biggest thing right now, this guy, he took this protein and be able to essentially snip out the genes that are related to the sex of a baby and then be able to change the sex. So these are things that obviously we do not want to have that with this. There's a lot of ethical issues behind that. When we have these sort of conferences, we tell them like, this is not what we want. We want to use synthetic biology to essentially create new drugs, drugs that can help the poor that can't afford it. We want to essentially engineer food that for places that can't agriculture their own food or don't have the animals to produce the meats. And so these are the things that we want to push for and educate them that there's really no health defects, or there's essentially all benefits. And I also think educating the young, I think that's also super important. And we already doing that too, having these like iGEM teams. I don't know if you've heard of this. It's like internationally genetically engineered machine. And every essentially university has one of these teams. And this is a great way to get them exposed to synthetic biology and understand the biology, the science. But I think what's also important is to make them understand the ethical issues of what they're doing as well. So I think if we sort of train them when they're young, then when they get to maybe my age, maybe they'll understand a lot more and then maybe won't do sort of these unethical things. So I think, again, it's all about education. I follow a bunch of great synthetic biologists, and whenever I see them post, they're always debunking somebody that's sort of putting synthetic biology down. So I think, it's always about just standing up for what you believe in and then educating them the right way, because maybe they just don't know. So now I would say my mom can eat that, I guess, strawberry that's been genetically modified without any worry. So yeah. Microfluidics is essentially integrating this lab that you see here onto sort of this credit card device. When I was in high school, I always did these experiments where you had all these beakers, right? And then you try to, mix A with B or mix C with A, things like that. Essentially what we want to do is integrate all that in sort of an automated fashion right onto this credit card size device. The main, I guess, sort of advantages with microfluidics is now we can automate. So we have this sort of box here, which essentially is connected to the device, which will essentially automate all the sort of fluid handling steps that are necessary in any sort of chemistry or biology experiment. Now, since we're taking the lab scale, reducing it down to, the palm scale, now we're looking at volumes that are 1,000 times less. So not only do we reduce volumes, we also reduce the costs, significantly. And just miniaturization just brings so many benefits in terms of multiplexing. And so what that means is that we can essentially perform multiple experiments, hundreds of experiments at sort of one time in parallel. I know when I tell my students that, hey, why don't you guys do 100 experiments today? I mean, if they didn't have microfluidics, I think they would sort of freak out. They'll be like, I'm going to be here all day, all night. Having that sort of miniaturization, having the possibility of multiplexing just really helps. The ultimate experiment for us would be to essentially place, this system here contains, a computer, this device holder, and this automation setup right here. And the idea is that we can place this in a doctor's office, right? A clinical sort of research lab. We would take a patient's blood, put it on to our device, and then they would re-engineer the cells that would, kill off cancer cells or make them more precise, that would attack exactly those cancer cells. After maybe a couple days, we would then take it back. Now we've engineered them and then place it back into the patients. We just want to democratize essentially cellular therapies. I mean, now this would be available in all the offices, and maybe we can reduce waiting times. That'll be the best thing. So yeah, this would give opportunities for not just one hospital, but maybe multiple hospitals, or just the clinical office down the street, to be able to do these sort of tests and then to be able to give patients what they deserve, especially these cancer patients that don't have possibilities of chemotherapy or other types of therapies. So this is one project that we're really excited about, and I think really microfluidics can really push through that no other platform can. So.